Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a few more people just still logging on, so we'll give them about 30 seconds and then we'll get underway. Okay, we might start now. Ladies and gentlemen, a very, very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us today on your lunchtime. We're here today to talk about a topic that has been in high demand, I guess you could say. We've had an overwhelming number of requests from both our existing clients as well as a number of people who have been to previous webinars and really wanting to explore a topic in regards to how important culture is in the current environment where it's becoming increasingly difficult to hang on to good people or to find the right people to join your business. So invariably, this topic is going to throw up a lot of questions. If I can ask you to ensure if you do have a question, please don't use the chat function, but rather put it in the Q&A feature. We will have some time at the end of this session, so we'll try to get through as many questions as we can. If your question's a little bit more complex or a little bit more sensitive in nature, we might ask one of the advisory team to give you a call at the end of the session and they can have a chat one-on-one to hopefully provide some complimentary advice and see how we can help. But look, with that in mind, let's get underway. So the importance of company culture or a lack thereof has been thrown into stark relief since the start of what has become known as the Great Resignation at the beginning of 2022. For any of our guests today that are currently recruiting, I'm sure that many of you will be able to attest that good help is proving harder and harder to find. Attracting the right candidate is difficult enough, but we're also finding that job seekers are far more discerning. And when it comes to selecting the employer or the job they want to go with, it's often not just down to the size of the remuneration package, but rather the peripheral elements that underpin a solid workplace culture and how that's been able to be communicated to them. When we think of a company culture, our minds are often drawn to Silicon Valley and the immense efforts taken by the likes of Google and Facebook to attract and retain the best talent within the tech industries. But culture is not all about beanbags and ping pong tables and complimentary kombucha. In fact, companies rarely set out to build a cool culture. In our experience, most businesses use words like high performance or client centricity or a safety-driven culture to ensure that every employee gets home to their families each night. But there's one thing that's absolutely certain, and that is that culture cannot be mandated. You can't shoehorn a desired culture into a business overnight, and it is never a short-term project. Culture is an organic phenomenon that requires constant nurturing and must manifest itself through the actions taken by a company and their leaders. Writing a vision, mission, and value statement is really easy, but breathing life into it and creating or enhancing a culture is far more difficult and requires a large investment of time and resources. We must also ensure that leaders within the business are living the values that underpin their organizational identity if you want culture to take hold. So it sounds like a lot of hard work, and quite often it can be. However, the payoffs are immense. One of the key metrics that accompanies positive workplace cultures is an increased length of tenure amongst the workforce, increased staff motivation, and increased individual performance and contribution. Companies who demonstrate to their workforce that they genuinely care will weather the current storm far better than those companies who put profits and margins above all else. And with that in mind, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. So my name is Alistair McDonald. I'm the Head of Business Development for FCB Group, and I've been with the organisation for 8 years. And on my left, I'm joined by Olivia Perry, Workplace Relations Consultant based out of our Melbourne office and a core member of our telephone advisory service. So from both of us, a very warm welcome. Now, for those of you not familiar with FCB Group, FCB is about 30 years old and comprises 5 core lines of business. On the far left, we have what's loosely known as our services side of the business, FCB Workplace Law, one of our specialist leading employment relations law firms within Australia. Smart Visa is our immigration and migration practice. Jumping over to the left-hand side of the screen, We have QMS certification services, which is the newest member of our family and actually joined in January, which looks after ISO certifications and NDIS certifications. So if you're looking for assistance in that area, please do reach out to us. We then have Enable HR, which is our in-house proprietary technology solution. It's unique in the market in the sense that all of the content and all of the workflows are built and maintained by FCB workplace law. So compliance and best practice process automation is very much at the heart of what we do. And some 12,000 businesses use it in both Australia and New Zealand. But the banner under which we're talking to you today is HR Assured. So HR Assured is our outsourced HR solution. It started about 7 years ago, actually not long after I joined the organization, and its slogan has always been avoid admin and create culture. And that's one of the ways in which we best support a business. As we've just touched upon, culture cannot be imposed from the outside, but rather needs leaders within the business to have the time, the energy, and the focus to go about business strategy or creating that culture. And that'll often come if they have the right levels of support to assist them in HR and people management. HR is all about providing best practice and technology and advice through HR Assured, where we can automate processes and give you back the time. Now, there are two core offerings within HR Assured. On our left, we have our workplace relations solution. So it starts off with a comprehensive HR compliance audit that's done from top to tail to really diagnose what parts of the organization need assistance. If there's anything that's a critical area of non-compliance immediately, we'll jump straight onto that. Or else really it looks at the gaps between where you are now and what best practice looks like and how we're going to work with you over the coming 1, 3 or 5 years to plug all those holes and help you lift to a standard of best practice. That's supported through the 24/7 unlimited telephone advisory service, which is manned by Olivia and her colleagues. Our HR software, which we've touched upon before, which is Enable HR, our library of legal resources, and insurance and representation that if you do find yourself with an employee-related claim, FCB Workplace Law will step in, take carriage of the matter. There's no out-of-pocket expenses for any of our clients. Our WHS management system pretty much mirrors HR. We're looking far more at the health and safety framework and architecture which governs your business. And we're able to address that through our WHS management software, providing the 24/7 unlimited advice through the team, and also the full range of policies and procedures that will be built for you when getting on top of your safety. So with that in mind, I'd like to hand over to Olivia, who's going to take us through today's agenda and what we're going to be covering off over the course of the next 40 minutes or so. Over to you, Olivia.
Thank you very much. So yeah, essentially we're going to be going through a piece of different pieces for culture, wider staff leave, and a few different tips, including building engagement, recognition, rewards, recruitment, onboarding, professional development, and really just going through the pieces that keep your staff and keep that retention. So looking into wider staff leave to begin with. So SEEK actually really dived into this, going through some statistics, in relation to this following the Great Resignation. Obviously, it was a big piece for SEEK. So they really looked into the working conditions and found that that was sitting at about 41% of why staff leave. So quite a high percentage in terms of that working conditions and working environment. Reasons that might sort of fall under that working conditions or working environment might be a lack of appreciation, feeling burnt out, lack of flexible options, and a few others that are listed there, including poor mental health. Organizational changes and restructure was obviously a really big thing following COVID and the pandemic, so might have been a really big reason as to why staff were leaving or feeling as though they needed to leave for a different job. And then looking again, 32% is still quite high for management and leadership in the business, really emphasizing that it really is from the top down, that really culture needs to start improving and being facilitated as well. So why is it important as well? So obviously there's a big benefit in terms of the cost and time savings. When you're looking at the recruitment, the onboarding experience, and all of the pieces that come to recruiting new staff, the cost and time savings of keeping and retaining those staff instead is obviously a bigger benefit. There's also pieces to increase productivity, staff morale, improved KPIs and profit margins. And those are only just really some of the key benefits that skim the surface. There's so many more, including, obviously the look of the business and the way the business presents itself, and multiple others as well as to why culture is important. Further to that, obviously, as pandemic life starts coming out, people are starting to leave their jobs in search of more money, more flexibility, and obviously just more happiness in general. And many people are really rethinking about what work means to them, how valued they are, and how they want to spend their time in their workplace. So it's really leading further to a more dramatic increase in resignations. So really retaining staff and really keeping that culture is becoming more and more and more important. So tip 1, we're going to look into building engagement. So introducing new opportunities and new employees into those opportunities to give really candid feedback is extremely important to employees and also your company. It can have twofold benefits in the fact that the employees feel really heard and feel as though they're getting involved within the business, but also the business can really find some new projects and suggestions that might emphasize the business and really help the business in that way as well. So it can really highlight problems before they surface too. So they can suggest new outside perspective to company decisions, and the organizations can really capitalize on employees' ideas and addressing those ideas very quickly and effectively. So further, obviously, to that, you're giving those employees a voice that starts with employee engagement surveys, potentially delivered with the aid of potentially modern engagement platforms, something along those lines, or even just surveys within. You can do them through Teams now and different avenues through Outlook too. So these solutions for surveys can help you ask the really tight questions, whether that be anonymously or not, to reveal how employees really feel about their team, their manager, their role, and the expectations that they have. So that can really aid the business just to understand before those exit interviews what the employees are needing and also build that engagement. There's also pieces like HR bots that you might be able to use as well, which facilitate 24/7 chats. But further to that, you might have someone internal who you might allocate as a potential sort of HR chatbot instead, where you might have that safe space essentially for employees to go to for them, where they feel they can be really heard regularly and ensure that they have that voice essentially. I guess looking into, again, why it's important, disengaged employees can be extremely detrimental to the organisation. They bring down morale, they discourage other employees from doing their best work and can set poor examples. At the moment, statistics note that 21% of employees note that they feel disengaged, and that disengaged costs can actually cost over 450 billion over a year in lost productivity. So it can be quite large detrimental pieces to the business on a monetary value. A lot of pieces, again, linking back to engagement, like failing to give employees a voice is one of the bigger pieces that employees feel that they need influence over. So giving them influence over decisions can also really lead to their professional development as well, but also sort of lending to assist in the organisation as well as engaging those employees. The biggest part of that, however, is really making sure that when you're analysing that information and really getting those surveys or those pieces from staff, that you're acting on that feedback. Sometimes not acting on that feedback can have a reverse effect and feel that employees aren't being given a voice or that their voice isn't important. So making sure you've got avenues to analyse that information and feedback and acting on it is extremely important. Switching it up as well, obviously if people feel as though they're bringing forward ideas which might not be, short term, it might be long term, making sure that you're touching base with those employees and really making sure that they feel a part of that project is important and can also really lead to professional development as well for them too. So moving on to recognition and rewards. So recognition and rewards, obviously quite an easy one to implement in some ways, but also quite a difficult one too. So sometimes that can be a monetary value piece. Again, something where you might look at your key values of your employees and your business and looking at potentially your policies and procedures in terms of how you would like to allocate potentially a monetary value to your recognition and rewards. Obviously a great benefit and something you could put to sell your business if that's something you can implement into the business. However, if it's something you can't in terms of monetary values, it doesn't mean that you can't skip out on recognition rewards. There's so many different ways that you can build a culture of recognition. And one of those might be, once a month, potentially recognizing people, sending out a team's email, noting, a few different people within the team that are really working above and beyond, and really giving their time and values to the company. But not only that, and just focusing on work balance and those sort of pieces, looking also at the values that your business has. So is somebody really helping out the team? Is somebody, creating a really nice culture? Is someone really friendly and creating that environment for a nice onboarding for a new employee? Really focusing on those pieces too can be really nice for recognition and rewards, because those are really important to culture as well, and can also facilitate a piece where you're not only recognizing, hard work and devotion, you're also recognizing values. So further to that, on the statistics, it has been noted that if employees are recognised multiple times within a month, they're 41% more likely to see, the business is 41% more likely to see increased retention within the business, and also 34% more likely to see increased engagement. So there are statistics to prove that recognition and rewards do go further in assisting the business and making sure that employees want to stay and want to make sure that they are consistently recognised and feel contributing to the business. So moving on to recruitment and onboarding. So we'll look at recruitment first. Recruitment's quite a tough one, and I did want to start this slide just noting that obviously the market is quite difficult, as we've noted at the moment. So if you are really struggling to recruit, you aren't alone, and there are little bits and pieces that you can do, but if it is just the market at the moment, unfortunately it is quite difficult. But a tip that you can have is really selling your company. So obviously employees expect to sell themselves in the interview and go through that process, but you really also want to be sold on the company too. So that'll make sure that when you do find the right employee and the right person that you would like to recruit, they're sold on your company and want to also take the role too. So really looking at what's interesting and the interesting aspects of your culture and your business that you can emphasize. So one of the ones I've put here is fringe benefits like monthly massages. Might not be possible, it might be nice as a business. Other pieces might be looking back at that recognition and rewards. Do you have, monthly employees of the month? Do you have, lunches that the team goes out every week or so on? All of those sort of bits and pieces really do add to a culture and really do add to why somebody may want to come into your company. There might also be bits and pieces of your company that you're unaware of that you're adding to the right employee. So it might be toil, it might be flexibility, it might be pieces where somebody can work from home. All those little bits really contribute. So something that you might want to dive into your company and really look into what's great about us, what do I really enjoy as a part of my company, and really putting those out to sell your companies is quite important. Another tip might be building relationships with other professional groups, potentially LinkedIn, universities and platforms like that, to really find your best candidate, and really broadening your scope for that candidacy as well is important and can assist in the process. So we're going to look now at onboarding. So obviously creating a really incredible onboarding experience from the get-go means the employee can feel really appreciated and part of the organisation from that first week. Coming into a new business can be quite anxiety driven and quite stressful. As you all know, starting a new job, that first couple of weeks is really integral and really helps the employees go through. So creating a really seamless onboarding experience is extremely important to retaining your staff, but also creating an initial understanding of your business for the employees that are coming in. So that can be important even if you do need a performance manager employee potentially in the future. You can really focus on the fact that training and dedication was taken on in the onboarding experience for that employee to really get to the satisfactory standard they need to be at. So potentially having that process of an onboarding process experience, so a checklist that the employee can come with, a detailed plan for each step of the way to stay on track. If you sort of throw around some paperwork for the new employee, it can be very overwhelming. So having a daily checklist, having a daily piece where they're touching in with a manager and coming up with that really detailed onboarding process plan that clearly defines each step, ensures that your new employee receives every bit of training that they need to succeed. Again, focusing back, if you did need to for performance management, you can then link that back to that, explaining that they did receive every bit of training that's necessary too. But it also obviously ensures that your newest team member is properly welcomed and introduced, and they don't feel like they're on their own in the company, and they really can enjoy that process of coming in. Obviously with that as well, if you are, linking to working online, working flexibly, maybe reaching out to your current staff and saying, look, let's touch base on Teams with the new employee, making sure that your managers feel empowered to touch base constantly with your new employee and making them feel incorporated within the company is really important when we are looking at that more online scope of time now, really. Also, maybe getting feedback is important, and a tip through that. So in your first week, you might want to have the manager seek and incorporate feedback from the new hires. It can be an invaluable source of information when you've planned that onboard experience and put a lot of time and effort into the process planning. To then get that feedback from someone who has gone through that process can be really great and an advantage in that way, but it also allows for them to have their voice and links back to that engagement piece too. A really important part of the initial stages of a job, as well as the onboarding experience, is giving a realistic idea of the job and also giving realistic timelines for the job. So making sure that you're starting off slow at the beginning, setting a comfortable pace, and giving that experience that the employee can take their time and go through the process, because sometimes rushing in employees through a process can really backfire on that as well. So making sure you're giving your new hires the time that they need to settle in slowly can really help them feel as though they're fully integrated within the business. Another little quick tip as well is making sure that all the culture and the jargon that you've got, every business has its own tone, culture and language. So making sure that you're dropping the new hire into the mix with explaining all of that lingo and making sure that they feel like they're a part of all of that culture and jargon and lens as well is really important, because it makes them feel a part of the team again, and obviously a part of that process too. So those are just a few tips and tricks on onboarding. We're going to look a little bit now into policies and procedures. So on the HRA Cloud, firstly, there are a plethora of policies and procedures, which are all extremely important. One of the ones which I always will suggest within my audit processes with new clients would be a code of conduct or an employee handbook. And this really does link back to culture and the expectations within the workplace, setting out those entitlements and really helping with those values. So quite important, integral ones too. So policies and procedures are important to many different assets of a business, from performance management all the way down to these culture pieces too. Noting as well for compliance, we do suggest that you have policies and procedures in place instead of having them within potentially an employment contract, mainly because it is quite easy for a business to vary a policy from time to time if need be. So having it within a policy and having that structure that all employees can have easily accessible is quite important, and that's why I would suggest it in that manner. So going forward as well, we'd maybe suggest that the company create some sort of values in place along with these policies and procedures. So a really easy one or a simple one that I heard the other day was something like innovation, integrity, inclusion. It can be like that. It can be quite detailed. It can be fun. It can be, really focusing on the values of your company. And I think that's quite important as well, to have that piece, because you can focus, again, even performance management, but you can really focus on that in terms of your recruitment too. So there's lots of different avenues where these values can really become a part of the team and a part of the corporation and the company. So lots of different ways in which HR Sure can help you with that as well. But really, focusing in on your business too for those values and looking at how you want to grow as a business and through this market. So that's why a little piece as to why policies and procedures can be very, very important. I guess further to all of that, another really, really important part for policies and procedures is the compliance part for work health and safety. Having those, potential bullying and harassment policies, which are accessed through HR Assured's Cloud, can be quite important to your duty of care for your employees, as well as showing that empathetic work health and safety avenue too. So, obviously bigger picture of that duty of care is legal compliance, but really does filter through for that culture to make make the staff feel as though they're appreciated, safe and comforted. Obviously bullying and harassment within the workplace is some of those pieces that is extremely important to culture, and something we can dive through with in detail on the telephone advisory line, and something we do quite often. But something to focus on for policies and procedures as well. So another important feature of that, definitely.
All right, we'll just pause there for one moment. Olivia, thank you. I know we've covered off a tremendous amount of content already. I can see from the question and answer section, we've already got quite a few coming through. If you'd like to have a conversation with one of our telephone advisory services on a complimentary basis, there's no obligation. Please, we'll just take out your phone. If you want to take a photo or scan that QR code, that'll take you straight through, and we'll be able to schedule a session for someone in our team to give you a call back at a convenient time. So we'll leave that up there for 1 minute, just to be able to give you a chance to take that. Okay, we'll move right along. Thank you. Thanks, Olivia.
Thank you. So we're going to move into professional development. So I've kind of touched on this a few different times, but I think professional development is extremely important for, from recruitment all the way down to different areas of goal setting and really retaining the employees, the important part. So we'll look quickly at training versus professional development. So there's quite key differences between that. So obviously you'd be looking at potentially training within the onboarding experience, but professional development is really important to that retaining of the employees. So something you'd focus on in terms of professional development, it does begin from day one, but it really is that company longevity and looking for a really solid career path. So you might have certain roles within the business where you can see a really certain and clear career path. So it might be important potentially for an employee to have that from the get-go, to say, look, if you're performing and your standards are the standards we're expecting, here is a really clear and concise career path we could take you on. Having that from the get-go can feel really safe to a new employee, but also can feel as though they can see the progression with you and they feel as though they're a part of the journey. Part of that journey might mean them being a part of that too. So different pieces for that is really important and can be a really easy way to incorporate keeping and retaining your staff and seeing that progression through the business for them. Another part to that, which is a great program, is having that mentoring and buddy program too. So mentoring can go by both ways. It can obviously start from the bottom to the top, and you could have reverse buddying as well, which I think is a nice way to incorporate professional development. So those who potentially would be reverse buddying might feel as though they're giving it incorporation to the business and feel as though they're learning by training too. It's again linking back to that onboarding experience too. Having that mentor program really feels as though, especially again if you're online, can make you feel as though you're a part of the team early on and you've got someone like an ally and a mentor to really process you through. Something which is a nice way to incorporate mentor programs too is you don't even have to focus on career paths. You might have two mentors who are in completely different areas of the business, but it might be someone who is potentially, a mother maybe, and is focusing on how they incorporate working as a mother and the business and how that flexibility works for them. And that might be really important for someone who's starting out. There might also be pieces of someone who is studying potentially and working through that program of studying and training at the same time of work and how they balance that process. So really looking outside of that scope too, you might have a clear career path for someone into a certain team, but they might also look elsewhere for mentors because there's different areas and ways that you can find those values and mentor programs through that as well. Linking back as well, the HR Cloud does have extremely amazing professional development processes in which you can go through bonuses, you can go through documents, guides, and really setting that goal-setting communication piece. So that's a really fun way to make it a collaborative process to make you feel like you might have a meeting with them where you're listening to them, creating that adaptability for professional development. Again, focusing on giving constructive feedback and really rewarding that feedback when they are taking that on constructively too. So that might be another piece linking back to your reward and recognition. So it might be, employee A took some really great constructive feedback a couple of weeks ago and has really incorporated that into their business. Or, mentor again, has done some really great mentoring of this other employee. So you might recognize that for the month potentially and have like a mentor month, something like that. There's lots of different ways in which you can really incorporate people and make them feel as though they're home at the workplace and incorporated within that company. So lots of different ways where you won't even need to spend money essentially. And, developing that program is a really fun way to do so. So step 5, we're looking into culture. Culture, looking into it. Again, we're going to link back to firstly the policies and procedures, the values. I think with culture, defining your values early on is quite important. So you might really look at the business and what sort of company and industry that you're in, and what cultures and values are really important to that industry as a standpoint. Again, can be really fun, can be short, can be long, really play around with how you feel as a business and how you want to be. So being authentic in that way is really quite important. We're going to focus a bit back and say, talk about the Great Resignation, essentially. From our standpoint and from, a lot of people, the Great Resignation is far from conclusion, essentially, especially for organisations that take on rapid and effective action constantly. The nature of the global pandemic meant that a lot of healthcare workers, for example, had to endure, potentially really high workloads while working in those conditions. And, obviously with a lot at stake and few alternatives, it created a lot of, pieces where people felt a lot of burnout, and potentially, we're looking for more flexible options in terms of remote working, or working, directly less with the pandemic. So building that psychological and physical safety has become more important than ever within culture for a lot of employers and employees, as well as creating that flexibility as well. We're in a scheme where essentially employees at the moment, and market where employees can, chop and change and decide where they'd like to go based on their flexibility and the remote work options. So if you can offer that as a business, you feel comfortable with it, something to definitely look into in terms of your culture. But with that, making sure that they don't feel as though they're an outsider being, working from home constantly, or that they're, making sure that they've got that psychological safety as well. So we might look a little bit. So we've got a definition here, apologies. We've got a definition here on culture, a really nice little tidbit on, the ideas, customs, social behavior, those sort of pieces, because, we kind of want it to be succinct. We want it to look into the values of people. We might look at the customs lens, we might look at, different areas of cultural areas, those sort of pieces. So potentially having different cultural days and making people feel included is another really nice way to sort of bring in people connecting and feeling as though they've got a voice and feeling as though they can bring all of their inclusions into the workplace. So coming through in that way. So linking back, I'm going to harp on about purpose and values, because purpose and values will create a really, really solid foundation for cultural change, especially if you truly believe in them. So making sure that corporate leadership at every level of the organization is extremely accountable for those values, and really committing the company to those values is extremely important. So if you feel as though there's different areas where there isn't that accountability, potentially linking in with HR Assured and discussing the fact of potential performance management, looking at those resources that we have in terms of discussing and having those well-being check-ins. I think those are really important to culture, because they create a culture where you're looking at the accountability of culture and making sure that the values are really maintained and continued, and they have that retention within the business. So looking at that as well. Something I want to touch on with culture too is potential wellbeing check-ins. So as a business, if you are a larger business that have managers or team leaders, really empowering those sort of team leaders and managers to have wellbeing check-ins and really promoting the psychological safety of your employees. going through all of those pieces and making sure that you've got a safe space and an empathetic voice for someone to hear can be very, very important to someone who is potentially struggling. But it also really creates that inclusion, it creates respect, and it creates an environment where someone feels as though the company really truly cares for them and has that empathetic voice for them. So that's something I really, really want to emphasize in this piece, because it is important that somebody, whether it be compliance for work health and safety, but also for that empathetic listening voice, it's extremely important in that case.
Olivia, thank you. I think you're absolutely bang on. And I think one of the first casualties when we get really, really busy, or when we're dealing with, crazy circumstances like we have been with the last couple of years with COVID, is people tend to knuckle down and just focus on the task at hand. But you can't underestimate the importance of some of these non-monetary things that we can do. It doesn't cost that much more, even in regards to some of the initiatives that we can put in place to ensure that staff feel like they're part of a broader team and that they're cared for. So certainly on the screen at the moment, we look at what we tend to find are the 5 biggest buckets of issues when it comes to what's hampering the development of successful workplace cultures. Resources can quite often be one. Do we have the right tools at hand? And have we laid the foundations? Have we got HR, operating correctly at the base level before we can start building towards the top of the pyramid, which is the implementation of successful strategies and culture. Prioritization is a big one. I think the organization needs to make a concerted effort and needs to demonstrate that to their employees and be quite open about it, that culture is important. And if they need to address an issue in their existing culture, or they're aspirational and trying to build a new one, that they've got everyone on board for the ride, and that it's a shared vision, which of course is the one next door. So it really is having that, the ability to communicate it to it and get people involved and wanting to be part of it, because you can't do it in isolation at the top of, from management's perspective alone. But management do need to be committed, as you've touched on. And of course, as we've said before, it requires time. This isn't going to happen overnight. There's not a silver bullet you can pull the trigger on now to arrest staff leaving and so forth, but you can begin the journey. And hopefully there's been a fair bit in today's session that you can look towards to draw inspiration. On the next slide, there's a special offer for those of you that are with us here today. Quite often when it comes to discussions around culture, it's hard to know what's broken. Especially if we're in a state of flux, it's difficult to often see the forest from the trees, or to really, know where we should be focusing our energy when it comes to the priorities of people management. So normally our HR health checks, it's a couple of hours of a consultant's time, normally priced at around $750. For those of you joining us today, we'd like to offer it on a complimentary basis. We think it's absolutely integral for businesses that want to address culture in a positive way to know the lie of the land first. So excuse me, if you'd like to take out your phones and focus on the QR code there, it'll take about 30 minutes of input of your time, and then for us to write the report and come back and take you through the findings and the recommendations. So all up end to end, it's about 2 hours the process in hand. So again, I'd encourage everyone that would like some assistance there to make use of that offer. Now, I can see there's been a raft of questions that have been cropping up. So we'll get to as many of these as we can. I'm conscious of the time, but we might start with this one. So, okay, my staff are leaving. How frequently should we perform reviews? I think that's meant to be performance reviews. We've tried doing them quarterly, but it's too time intensive. Great question. I'd probably take a step back first and look at the content of those meetings, or what's been discussed in them, and I guess how intrinsically linked they are to the reasons that staff are leaving. So a question to me that probably crops up there is there a shared understanding of success and what's expected of an employee? Do they have clear KPIs or key results areas that are forming the focus of it? And the timing is important, but I don't think pushing for every 3 months, for example, is going to be a silver bullet, if you like. I mean, we do ours biannually. So every 6 months, we do our performance reviews here at FCB. We have less formal sessions, but they're every month with the managers. I certainly do one-on-one with my team, but I wouldn't probably underestimate the importance of the informal catch-ups as well. And I think we touched upon it a little bit earlier on, going for a coffee, going and having lunch, probably getting outside the physical environment of the office as well, and giving a chance for that feedback loop to open up. But certainly managers, and this is really down to that at that management level, managers having the interest in their staff and ensuring those performance reviews are being conducted. Okay. I want to improve our culture, but I don't feel senior management are on board. What do you suggest? Yeah, well, look, that is quite often. I think we've spoken about, the importance of all management at all levels contributing to a successful workplace culture. Look, changing culture can be a bit like trying to steer the Titanic. And if senior management aren't on board, I imagine it's going to be a lot easier to hit the iceberg. But I wouldn't feel like you're powerless at the team manager level to create a culture within a team. We know that all teams aren't created equal. We know there are higher performing teams within any organization. Quite often that will come down to the morale and the culture that's been set at that team level. So team leaders, what is the vision that you want to set for that team itself? And what are you able to draw on from within the broader company? So, okay, if senior management's not on board, you might not be having revolutionary change in your culture, but if there's incremental change that you want at the team level, I'd absolutely go to HR and see what they can suggest to assist you, or go to someone who you respect as a mentor, or someone else within the senior management tier that's able to give you some guidance or give you some recommendations. Okay, Olivia, I might throw this one to you. What non-monetary options are available to me to keep my staff? I only have 18 people. So I think we've touched on quite a few of those, but I'll throw to you for that one.
Yeah, definitely. As sort of mentioned, I think there's great value in reward and recognition, whether it be monetary or not. Not every company has the availability for those monetary values, but it doesn't mean that you can't recognize, still have an employee of the month, still go through that process of essentially recognizing your staff in that way. It might even be, a lot of people are on Teams now. It might even be little shout outs. I know they've got little praise pieces in the Teams chats now where you can essentially shout out to people, and that doesn't even have to be management as well. If you've got a close-knit team of 3 people, maybe every Thursday you have a catch up and go through that process too. In terms of shouting out to people as well, when we spoke about that progression planning and the professional development, going through that progression planning of, little bits and pieces of building up to the next step where they're in that clear career path is a really nice non-monetary way to go through that too. You might have different training elements as well, which they feel as though they can add to value, which would add value to the company without having monetary values. So there's lots of little different ways that you can successfully implement it without having to spend a lot of money, or, in ways that can implement money coming into the business as well. And empower the company and the business and the employee, to feel as though they've got that voice, they've got that recognition, they feel as though they've really been a part of the company through that process too.
Yeah, indeed. Mate, this next one's a bit like how long's a piece of string. Is it easy to create a good workplace culture with a small organization? What are your thoughts on that? I'd say yes. I would say yes, because I think there's less elements to control. But again, I think the foundations of everything we've discussed need to be adhered to. Obviously, if you've got the right mix of people and the right motivation, I'd suggest it probably is. But again, we've got clients who have thousands of employees who have a great workplace culture. Again, I think it needs leaders from within the organization to ensure it's a priority, though, to achieve that. But what are your thoughts, mate?
Yeah, definitely agree. I think almost a yes and no answer. There can definitely be extremely successful small businesses which have really, really intrinsic values, great culture, and have retained staff. We've got examples of it where they've retained staff for numerous years because the staff feel as though they're heard and they're emphasized, and all those pieces that we've discussed. And I agree, almost it's a little bit less labor intensive when you do have a small team, obviously dependent on who you've got available to action that work and your workloads within the business too. But I think realistically, all of the pieces that we've gone through in terms of culture, professional development, training, onboarding experiences, whether you're a team of 2 people or a team of, thousands and thousands of in a company, as going through this process, I would suggest the exact same things, defining your values, being authentic, really focusing on work health and safety, really focusing on empowering your staff and having that ability for them to have a voice. Whether, again, you could just be you and one other employee, and still having that facilitation is extremely important, and also can be manifested in all teams, essentially.
Yeah, agree, mate. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we might leave it there. I can see a number of the other questions we've got are getting a little bit technical, so we'd love to, I will ensure that we actually get someone from the TAS team to give each of you a call. We've got your details from your enrollment. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I'd like to, of course, thank Olivia Perry, who's done a brilliant job with us today, and also Annette and the broader marketing team as well, who've helped with the presentation and obviously putting on the event. So we thank you all for your attendance. Please, we'd love feedback on, of course, the different topics that are important to you. But if you are finding yourself struggling with culture, or you do have a specific query, reach out to us and we'll obviously do our best to assist you. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll look forward to speaking with you soon. Take care.